This is LGR, London Greek Radio.
Κατέβασε τη δωρεάν εφαρμογή του London Greek Radio από το App Store για iOS και Google Play για Android και συντονίσου. London Greek Radio 103,3. Μας φέρνει πιο κοντά.
This is London Greek Radio and I'm Vasoula Christodoulou. Today I'm delighted to welcome journalist and author Sean Mathews. Sean is a Greek-American journalist who has spent many years reporting across the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean. He's a correspondent with Middle East Eye and has also written for publications including The Economist and Al-Monitor. Based in Athens, he travels extensively across the region, exploring the complex connections between Greece, Europe and the Near East. His first book, The New Byzantines, The Rise of Greece and Return of the Near East, has received widespread acclaim with reviews in the Financial Times, The Economist and the Tablet, and was recently longlisted for the prestigious Runciman Award. Last week, Sean presented his book at London's Frontline Club in a discussion hosted by Middle East Eye and moderated by renowned journalist Peter O'Born. Sean, welcome to London Greek Radio. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. And I'd like to start with your recent event at the Frontline Club in London. I know the discussion went very well because I was there and I really enjoyed the discussion. But what sort of response did you get from the audience and readers there?
Well, Vasoula, it's amazing to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction. We did get a chance to meet at the book launch at the Frontline Club, the London book launch, and it was a real treat having you there. I think the crowd was fantastic. You know, this was basically the third big talk I've done. I did a launch in D.C. As you said, I'm a Greek-American journalist, so I did the first book launch in D.C. We had a book launch in February in Athens, which was also fantastic. But the crowd in London was just absolutely engaged, very interested. We were really lucky enough and honored to have the Greek ambassador there, which I think meant a lot about how Greece is seeing itself as this emerging player in the Eastern Mediterranean and the importance of kind of Greece restaking, let's say, a claim to its historic neighborhood, which it's always belonged to, and it's coming back to in many ways. So I was really impressed with the questions. And again, I think just the diversity of the crowd. I mean, you were there. So we had folks from Lebanon, from Palestine. We had American diplomats in the audience, actually. We didn't mention that, but there were a few members of the U.S. Embassy there. So the Greek Embassy was there. And just Kuwait, from the Gulf states, from the UAE, from Saudi Arabia, Qatar. It was really just a fantastic crowd and really an amalgam of what I call the Near East, right? This historic territory of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, I have to admit it was full house and it was very interesting, and it was nice to see, as you said, Mr. Yannis Saousis, the ambassador, you know, which it was really nice to see so many people. Now, before we talk more about the book, I would like to know a little bit about your own journey, and I mean about your background. You are Greek American. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and what first drew you toward journalism and in particular towards covering the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean?
I'd be happy to. And it's funny, you know, at the book talk, I read a little passage from the epilogue, which talks a little bit about my family's origins in Greece. So I always feel that I'm explaining why I'm Greek-American, because I have a very Anglo-Saxon name, right? So the Sean comes from my mom, who is Irish-American. But, of course, my father is Greek-American, and our family name is Mathews. So my dad's, my papu, comes from Enoussis, which is an island right next to Chios. So we also had some members of the Enoussin community at the book talk, which was fantastic. And my yaya comes from Verdia. So my family name is actually a Greek name. It was Americanized by my grandfather. Very late, actually, oddly enough. I found out when I was going through the records. He was called Costa Mathews all of his life, but legally he didn't change his name from Matheus to Mathews until the 1980s, which surprised me. I just found that out recently, so that was kind of a fun thing that my brother and I discovered. But in many ways, you know, I know you wanted to talk about my roots. The book in and of itself is kind of a journey about how I came back to Greece.
Okay.
As a Greek American. So I always tell people, I came to the Middle East from Greece, both physically, because Greece is always the first country I stop in on my way to the Middle East, just because of the geography of moving east from the U.S., and it's also the country which really inspired me to explore the Eastern Mediterranean. Of course, my dad's family came from the lands of what we call New Greece, right? Kind of the territories that were, most recently kind of part of Greece, formerly of the Ottoman Empire. So I kind of grew up with these stories about, especially coming from Eleusis, sailors and seamen in the ports of Alexandria and Smyrna. And it was really this family history that sparked my interest in the Middle East and kind of set me on the road to journalism. So in the book, I discuss actually being in medical school in the U.S. I had gotten into med school. I was very proud of that achievement and logged down with exams and really kind of going through the routine, right, of studying to be a doctor. But when I finally asked myself the question about what I wanted to do with my life, I found out that I wanted to explore my family roots in this region, the Eastern Mediterranean. So I moved to Jordan to study Arabic, and the rest is history. I wrote, as you said, for Al-Monitor, for The Economist, and then for the last 5 years I've been a journalist with Middle East Eye. So this book itself is really kind of a journey of how I came to the Middle East from Greece again, and I think that surprises some people because we think about Greece kind of as this birthplace of Western democracy and the cradle of ancient civilization. But coming from, family roots from land that were once part of the Ottoman Empire until most recently, and this history of trade and seafaring in the Eastern Mediterranean, that is actually what brought me to the Middle East.
Amazing, very interesting. Now, when people hear the word Byzantine, many think of Asian history or distant empires. What does the term New Byzantines mean to you, Sean?
Yeah, so, it's funny. I've had a lot of questions about where I came up with the title, and there was a few things. In the book, one of the lodestars, kind of the guides in the book that I cite regularly, is Patrick Leigh Fermor. Obviously, this really iconic British travel writer. And, in the 1930s, Patrick Leigh Fermor, when he was just 20 years old, I believe, he walked from the Hook of Holland all the way to Constantinople. And it's an incredible journey that he made kind of in the interwar period, right? And he kind of saw the Balkans and Central and Eastern Europe as they were going through these changes, right? The monarchies that once defined the region had collapsed, and the Nazis, this awful movement was emerging kind of, and Patrick Leigh Fermor kind of walks through this culture and history. Anyway, Patrick Leigh Fermor, who obviously went on to live in Greece and kind of write these beautiful travel books about the region, he first came across Rebetika, the music genre, on the coast of the Black Sea. And Leigh Fermor tries to describe Rebetika, and he says, critics would be wrong to call it un-Greek. And the best way that I can describe it is that it is an amalgam of Greece and the Orient, which is captured by the word Byzantine. So on one hand, I lean on Patrick Leigh Fermor's assessment of this beautiful music genre, right, which emerged in the ports, in the brothels, and the old trading houses, and the cafeterias of the Eastern Mediterranean. And I latch onto that word Byzantine. The other thing that I really tried to do in the book is kind of show this continuum between the Byzantine and the Ottoman empires, because I think there's a confusion, right? When a lot of people think about Byzantium, they don't really think of it as being an Eastern empire. But of course, the Byzantines, right? After the fall of Rome, they controlled wide swaths of today what we consider the Arab and the Muslim world: historic Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt. And the Byzantine Empire really was an Eastern empire. It was Eastern Orthodox Christian. The Eastern Orthodox faith really features heavily in my book, which I definitely call a Middle Eastern religion, a Middle Eastern faith that belongs more to the East than to the West. So I try to kind of center the book around kind of this Byzantine identity and this Oriental identity of Greece. And of course, it was Robert Byron, the great travel writer, who wrote The Road to Oxiana. And of course, he wrote this beautiful book called The Byzantine Achievement in the 1920s, really unpacking kind of the Byzantine Empire. And it was Robert Byron, who was no friend of the Ottoman Empire, actually, quite a critic of it, who said that the Byzantine Empire was the Ottoman Empire, Constantinople the heart of each. So what I tried to do in the book is kind of show this continuum between Greek identity and the wider Arab-Muslim world, the wider Middle East. And for me, Byzantine really kind of encapsulates the essence of that.
What is the reaction you get from the Greeks about this? Saying that Epsilon Greece is also like a different part of the world, that they didn't think Greece was part of that world.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing. In the book, about half of the book takes place, because at heart it's a travel book, and half of the book takes place in Greece, and half of the book takes place outside of Greece. And in my travels in Greece, I really focus on the lands of New Greece, right? These territories which kind of the Greek state absorbed as the Ottoman Empire was collapsing. So Macedonia, Thrace, Epirus. And interestingly enough, what I say in the book is that at the time, these regions were seen as part of the wider Middle East. To both Greeks in Athens and to kind of Western observers. So as the Greek state was absorbing Thrace and Macedonia and Epirus into the new country, they were really seen as absorbing these Oriental regions. And it was only until really recently, until the 1970s, let's say, that Greeks started to see themselves as part of the West, right? Even the Greek Revolution of 1821, right? Many people tend to think of it as kind of a revolution for democracy, and all of this. But at heart, and Mark Mazower wrote a beautiful book about this, which I cite in my own book, the Greek Revolution, at heart, it was kind of this Eastern Orthodox uprising against the Ottoman Empire. And, the Greek revolutionaries kind of would cite the Romeiko, this notion that they could reincarnate the Byzantine Empire, this Eastern Empire. So, historically, what I try to say in the book is that Greece has always been part of the Middle East. And it's only in the last 60, 70 years that Greeks started to see themselves as part of the West. Of course, Greece was the first country in the wider kind of Balkans and wider Middle East that kind of got this bug for Western nationalism and Western statehood. But even then, even today in Greece, kind of you do see these kind of connections between Greece and the wider Middle East. So the reception, at times, I think there's been this westernizing force in Greece, right? Because in the post-war era, obviously, Greece was kind of, it was decimated by civil war. And how did Greece recover from World War II? Well, they recovered by kind of joining the West, right? So Greece had to race to join NATO in the 1950s. And then Greece had to race to join the European Union and adopt the euro. I think the financial crisis changed, though, how some Greeks, especially a younger generation, see themselves between East and West. And as we've seen kind of Eastern powers rising, like the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, even China, Greeks are starting to see that, there is a promise, there are benefits to being part of the East, right? And as we see the West fracturing, and kind of we see this political polarization in countries like the UK and in France and in the US especially, the East doesn't look so bad, I say. So the reception, oddly enough, has been quite interesting. And, the book talk that we had in Athens was full, and the Greek Prime Minister himself is a fan of the book. And so we had a meeting, and, he took a nice photograph with the book. So I think it's really garnered a lot of interest because, again, what I say is that it's a throwback, is that the Greeks were always part of the wider Middle East. And only in the last 70 or so years did kind of this westernization drive really bring Greece into the West. And now, as I say, it's rejoining the East.
Thank you. Sean, how long it took you to prepare the book? I mean, to do all this research, because we are talking about a huge research and travels, to so many places.
Yeah, so some of the travels in the book go back 5 years, actually. As a journalist, basically, I spend most of my time kind of between Greece and the Arab world. So I lived in Egypt for a while. I have 2 chapters on Egypt, and I kind of cite my experiences living in Cairo. And then I also cite kind of my travels in Turkey and Lebanon a little bit. So in general, some of the travels go back 5 years, and the anecdotes and the meetings that I've had, especially when I moved back to Greece full-time in 2020. But in terms of writing the book, it took about 14 months, actually. So, the easiest part was the travels, and the funnest part, I have to say, was the travels and kind of meeting all the people and the encounters that I had in Istanbul, meeting the last Greek, residents of Istanbul, meeting the Greeks of Jerusalem, the Greeks of Cairo, and then traveling throughout, Thrace and Macedonia. That was the funnest part. And then, you have to kind of buckle down and do the writing itself. But the writing was also, because it's not an academic book. It's a book that's kind of structured, as you know from the talk, Vasoula. It's a book that's really structured to be easy to read. And I want it to be a guide, right? To make the history very approachable to people and to put a personal note on it. And that's why the interactions and the interviews were so important, because I wanted to kind of put a real life story to this history.
Yes, it is easy, and thank you for making the book easy for everyone, because this is the whole point. You want everyone to understand, and learn perhaps, many things, I will say. Now, looking ahead, what role do you see Greece playing as a cultural bridge between Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean?
Right. So, and this is a conversation that I have a lot with both Greek policymakers, Arab diplomats, and U.S. officials. Greece's role kind of as this geopolitical hub is only going to increase in the coming years, actually. And oddly enough, that is actually because what we're seeing is this weakening of the West, especially this kind of weakening of the U.S. So as kind of the Western alliances like NATO fracture, and as we see rising powers in the Middle East, like Israel and Turkey, and also the Gulf states, the center of geopolitical gravity, the center of demographics, the weight of kind of populations, economic might, is all shifting to the east of Greece in its proximate neighborhood. And, there's a trend here in history, too, which I think a lot of people forget. The Byzantine Empire, which was this incredible, cosmopolitan, amazing empire, right, which controlled vast swaths of territory across the wider Middle East. By the late 1400s, the Byzantine Empire was starting to decline. And this is where it gets kind of controversial for the Greeks, but the history is very important. The rise, actually, of the Ottoman Empire, and in this kind of, this new empire that was emerging in Anatolia, on the ashes of the Byzantine Empire, of course, in many ways, it was advantageous for Greek merchants and traders. And there's some brilliant research that's been done to show that actually, the Greeks, of course, they were freer and they were more prosperous in the Ottoman Empire than they were under the Western powers at the time, especially kind of Venice and Genoa, which were competing with the Ottomans for control of the Eastern Mediterranean. So what I say in the book is that actually the rise of the East normally helps Greeks, believe it or not. And of course, Greece in many ways has benefited from kind of the conflicts that we're seeing in the Middle East in terms of its economy, right? Because a lot of money has been invested into Greece as a safe haven, because Greece is part of the European Union, to be sure, and because it's part of NATO. So a lot of people from the Middle East are looking at Greece as a bolt hole or a safe haven. And that's why we've seen kind of these investments here. And of course, you're in London, and I talk to a lot of people in the shipping community. Greece's shipping industry also, it has actually benefited from the wars unleashed in the Middle East, right? Because of higher shipping rates, which is very interesting. A lot of people don't realize that, right? You would think kind of on the surface that these Houthi attacks in the Red Sea against global shipping and kind of the Iranian and American blockades of the Strait of Hormuz would be bad for shipping. But actually, the shipping industry has benefited greatly from it because it's increased the shipping rates. So in many ways, Greece is kind of benefiting from this geopolitical reordering that we're seeing in the world today. The other thing that I want to say in the book, or that I want to say, which I discuss in the book, is that, Greece's value to the United States is actually increasing, which is interesting. And that's because the United States' overall power is declining in the wider Middle East. So as we see kind of the U.S. separating, in a sense, from NATO, right? President Donald Trump has kind of really ruptured the transatlantic relationship. The U.S. is looking for a country to partner with that can bridge its interests between Europe and the Middle East. And Greece, of course, is the perfect country to do that because Greece is situated on this crossroads. So for a superpower like the U.S. that is downsizing and that is looking for allies that it can count on, Greece is actually very, very attractive because you kill two birds with one stone in Greece, right? If you have your base at Suda Bay or a naval base at Alexandroupolis. So on one hand, Greece's value to the U.S. is increasing. And also because I think we're going to kind of continue to see this trend of migration from the wider Middle East. Greece is on the front lines of defense of Europe, from migration. So for the European Union, of course, Greece's geopolitical importance is also increasing. I say in the book, right, that in 2015 during the economic crisis, it was Greece that really looked shaky and kind of, unstable, right? Whereas the Western institutions were kind of browbeating Greece into submission. Today, what we see is that Greece looks a lot more stable than the Western institutions. So its value to these Western institutions is actually increasing. And if Greece plays its cards right, and I have to stress this, right, Greece needs to play its cards right to kind of maximize the benefits for Greek citizens who are kind of missing out on some of these wider trends, especially in real estate investment, which is pricing them out of the local market. But if Greece can play its cards right, it can really extract some benefits and some gains from the West as the West kind of fractures and looks to shore up its southern flank. Of course, Greece's importance also to Israel is increasing. Greece's importance to the Arab world is increasing. So I think Greece is going to continue to play this hub role as we see the space between the East and the West shrink. One of the things that I try to say to people, and again, this is something that's hard, I think, for some Greeks to understand, but it's really critical. In the early 1950s, both Greece and Turkey joined NATO together. And at that time, basically what happened was the U.S., I say, it surpassed the British Empire's wildest dreams of dominating the Eastern Mediterranean. Effectively, the Eastern Mediterranean became an American lake. And while that was good for the U.S., and it was good in a way for Greece and Turkey because it prevented them from going to war together, it kind of made the area very boring. And what I say in the book is that the Greeks, kind of as the ultimate Levantine traders of the Eastern Mediterranean, actually thrive in a multipolar world. So now what we're seeing is kind of the U.S. retreating from the region. We're seeing new powers kind of come in and angle for influence here, especially the Gulf states. And this multipolar world actually has some benefits for Greece. And this is really the lesson that I want people to take away from, is that in this new world order that we're seeing, this multipolar order, Greece can be a winner. And there are some signs that it's emerging, and that's what I try to do in the book. I try to find the success stories of Greeks who are tapping their advantage as this bridge between East and West to kind of succeed in this multipolar order.
Thank you so much, Sean. And I've got my copy, of course, but could you tell our listeners from where they can get their copy of your book?
Of course. Thank you, Vasoula. So the book is available on Amazon, of course. And then also at any basically big bookstore in the UK. So Waterstones, Blackwell's, Dawn Books, you can go in and you can get it there.
Thank you, Sean. And one last question. Now that your first book has been so well received, are you already thinking about your next writing project? I know it's not Cyprus. It won't be the second, maybe the third.
Maybe the third. I am thinking about my next writing project. There is a project underway. It is also a maritime project. So it's not Eastern Mediterranean focused, but it is adjacent to the Eastern Mediterranean. And I have a lot more travels planned, a lot more interviews coming up. And I can't say more for now, but I will keep you and your listeners
informed. Please. Yes, keep us posted. Thank you so much, Sean. All the best. And we are looking forward to know more about your next book. Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was John Mathews. I'm Vasoula Christodoulou, and you are listening to London Greek Radio.
This is LGR, London Greek Radio.
Ο αγαπημένος σου ελληνικός σταθμός στα social media. Ακολούθησέ μας στο Instagram και στο TikTok, βρες μας στο Twitter και κάνε like στη σελίδα μας στο Facebook London Greek Radio.